Hello, everyone. This is Ed Brenegar, and welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. My guest today is Trevor Waldock, and we have been introduced to each other. I forget how, but we've been introduced to each other, and we have some stuff to talk about today that I think you'll find interesting. So, Trevor, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Ed. Good to see you again. Yes, so a very varied background. I spent a first career in the church, having come from a very non-religious background. I had some spiritual experiences, and that led me on a journey to the church. And my speciality, if you like, there was how do you create spaces for people who don't want to go to church to find a space to explore spirituality, I guess. So it was a kind of, what does church for the unchurched look like?
I like that.
And then from there, I transitioned into the theme that's gone throughout, which is leadership. So I think I was converted to leadership at age 19, and from then onwards, it was a thread throughout. So left the world of church, entered the world of consulting, worked with a European consultancy, and then set up my own company in London and was working in London and Europe with that executive coaching. But then out of that, through a series of events, I actually went to Africa because I was supporting a project to get started. And I got very involved in that, and it led me to start an international NGO, international charity, which was all about how do you help young people in the poorest communities in the world learn to lead themselves out of poverty. So I spent the next 15, 17 years doing that, and was exciting, rewarding, challenging, as you would expect. So I did that, handed over the leadership of that a few years ago. The theme that has then continued along with leadership for me is eldership. I have been both fascinated and concerned by the question of where are the elders in our particularly Western society, and seeing the lack of that, seeing the lack of any aspiration to it, involvement, space for elders. So I've been working on that probably 17 years. That's led to a couple of books called To Plant a Walnut Tree and then Becoming Mandela, and the Youth Compass Project, which is trying to approach it from a young person's perspective. So I've been working on those things, excuse me. And so along with that, I continue to coach. I do intergenerational mentoring. I write, I speak, pretty much the same as yourself, I guess. So that's a thumbnail. Back up a bit. What I would love to know is, what does the word elder or eldership mean to you personally? What's your understanding of eldership?
Well, the simple description is that it's an older person, but I don't think you become an elder by becoming old. I think actually eldership has a lot to do with experience and wisdom, and that you have wisdom to impart to people. And the challenge, I think, in the West is that we are so dominated by this belief in the inherent value of young people that they do not see beyond their own age to recognize that there's something for them to learn from people who have gone before them.
Yeah. And have you had experience of elders in your own life?
Yes, I have.
Tell me about that. I mean, I'd love to know some examples of who were they, and how did they elder you? How did they do it? And was there something about their personal backstory that you think qualified them to be an elder to you?
I think what qualified them was their character. And part of that character was their ability to cross over generational boundaries and to communicate with young people. And I'll give you a couple examples. I too began my life working in the church. I became an ordained Presbyterian minister, and I'm still an ordained Presbyterian minister. I retired last year, but I'm still an ordained minister. But I just chose, early on to go into leadership work, and so that's a different story. But so my first job out of college was to do high school ministry, and I was in a training program, and there was this nonprofit organization had been doing high school ministry since the early 40s, and this was it. So this was in the mid 70s, and there was a man who is a part of the program. The trainees would come together in the summer for classes. We're taking theology classes, biblical classes, theology classes, counseling, things like that. And this older gentleman who had been with the ministry since its founding, so he was up in his 70s at this point. He spent a lot of time with us, just getting to know us and talking about what we were going to experience, and asking us how we would respond to a situation. And so he helped us to think through how we would do this. And then the other person I'm thinking of is my high school football coach.
Okay.
I went to an all-white high school back in the old South of the 1960s. And my senior year, we had an African-American head coach that came to coach us. And as you can imagine, that was a very tough situation. And watching him function in a complex, very racially charged environment with such dignity and self-respect, that he became sort of the model for me and how I wanted to live. To live with dignity and honor, and to treat people with respect. Those are things that I saw in him, and have sought to model in my life ever since.
Wow. And just tell me a bit more about what you think their backstory was that qualified them. I mean, you've given some hints there, but
I don't think it's necessarily the backstory. I think it's how they approached the way they live their lives. I think they were self-critical and were willing to change. I think they had a lot of self-awareness, and as a result, they had a sense of who they were and who they wanted to be, and that was, in many respects, that's the value of eldership that gets communicated to young people, particularly if they're in their teens and early 20s. That's that sense of presence, that a person can walk into any situation and be able to manage that. That's kind of what and what they experienced in their previous years, I'm sure was full of challenge, and I think that's how they learn to cope with all of that.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. So looking at kind of the wider frame now, in terms of eldership in society today, particularly in the West, because I think the global South has a different relationship to this word than we do. So one of my questions is, do you see elders as having relevance for today's society? Is it something that we had and has gone and we should just move on? Or do you think it has a relevance in society today? And if so, what relevance do you see, and how could it be expressed?
I definitely see relevance, and I think it's not just a relevance of convenience. I think it's an essential thing, and it's a critical need that we have. And I would describe what I see. I seek out young people. I seek out people who are millennials and Gen Zers. You know, if I'm in a if I if I go to a coffee shop and there's a young person sitting, I will go sit close by and I'll say something to them. I'll try to start up a conversation, and because I want to learn from them. So that's the opening, is tell me about who you are. I want to learn from you. So I use the language of mutual mentoring. So they need to mentor me so that I, as an older person, can understand their generation. Then I say, well, here's what I experienced, or here's what I learned, and then that's really important. But maybe the most significant thing I see that elders offer to young people in the West is a belief in them, that we can say to them, you have something to offer to the world. And I believe that if you were to find that and to give yourself to that, your life would be full and rich, and you'd be making a contribution, you'd be making a difference that really matters. And I try to have that conversation with every young person I end up in some kind of conversation with.
Right. Wow.
So let me give you one other example of this. So I'm in, just like you, I'm in a number of groups that meet on occasion, some weekly, some quarterly, some monthly, some bi-monthly, and for conversation. And I was invited into one last year, and I met a young woman who is a law student in Switzerland. And I reached out to her. We were on LinkedIn together. I reached out to her, said, let's talk, and we had a conversation. And she's leading a leadership group at her university. And I said, so I asked her, I says, are any of the faculty at your university mentoring the students in your leadership group? And she says, oh, no, they don't do that. And I said, well, let's create a mentoring relationship between me and the people in your group. Let's talk. I mean, I don't want to lecture them. I just want to kind of a conversation with them.
Yeah.
So we set up we had an hour and a half, and I said maybe 5-6 minutes of stuff about leadership. And then I asked them to talk and tell me what kind of questions you have. And out of that came 3 things which I thought were really important. 3 things which kind of define that group of students at this point in their lives. The first thing was they're disappointed with the way the world is functioning. The second thing is that they have genuine fear about the future. And the third thing was they really wanted to understand what it meant to have a purpose for their life.
Wow, great questions.
And I felt like, okay, I can work with all of that. I can, yes. And I don't have to be the expert. All I have to do is help them come to understand what their own position is, what their own perspective is.
So it's really interesting, because in both the kind of mutual mentoring and that example, you offered the space.
Yeah.
So, because that's one of the questions we'll come on to in a minute, is, if people don't know, there is a thing as eldership. The elders do not get invited into a conversation, but you're actually saying, you suggest, you make the space, the offer.
That's right.
That sounds important. Yeah.
I mean, is that what your experience has been?
Yeah, I think it is my experience. And it's also one of my biggest questions, is how do we, number one, how do we help people of our generation to aspire to be elders, to convert all of that life experience into something that they can then invest and contribute into the next generation. So there's an aspirational issue. And how do we then also help young people to aspire to become elders from a young age? So there's that that whole part, which has my attention. But the other bit is this question: well, how do you create channels, avenues? I hate to use the word structures, but pipeline, whatever the
structure to this.
It's like, how do you make it happen? Because what I see is a lot of older people who haven't become elders, but I also see some older people who I think have become elders, but they don't know what to do with that. They don't know how to offer it, because they are not being asked, and they don't know how to offer.
Okay, so this is the way I see it, and this is a larger issue than simply related to elders. I think much of how our society is structured through organizations diminishes people's sense of responsibility and the opportunity to make a difference that matters. And so they do their job, they get their pay, they have their leisure time activities, they have their hobbies, and then they have their children, they have their grandchildren, and then they retire, and they retire to a very serene, pleasant life. And the thought of actually, I mean, what I find of people who are older than me, they go out and do things, but they're doing things. They're not actually building relationships. They're not building relationships that can be mentor relationships. They'll go and work at a soup kitchen, or they'll go in and work at some kind of shelter or something like that. They like the idea of doing something, but the relational side of that is not as prevalent. And I think it's because in many cases businesses have not done a good job of creating an environment for relationship building.
Right.
And so people come and do their job, and there's a connection, but it's all on pretty much a transactional level.
Get around the doing. Yeah.
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 So that's kind of what I see. And so if I think what we have to do, if we're kind of see ourselves as in this eldership role, then we have to be the elders to other elders in that.
Okay, let me just pick up that point, because it's crucial. You said if we see ourselves. So talk to me about that shift, because there's a whole load of aging people who aren't even thinking about eldership at all, let alone seeing themselves as elderships. So what you're talking about is an identity issue where you begin to see yourself. So tell me, how do you think that shift takes place? How do you move from just aging to beginning to say, either I want to be an elder, I think I am an elder, what can I do with it? How does that identity shift take place?
I would say there are two things that happen. One is they come into a relationship with someone who already identifies that way, and they see something attractive in that, and they say, so how did you become like this? Where did you find this? The second thing is they have to have a desire. And so where do they get that desire? And it may be that, I've talked to a lot of people. I mean, and I'm sure you have. I'm saying for 40 years, I've talked to people who are older than me who have retired. And what I find is that they say, well, I'm busier now than I've ever been. And
yes, I hear that.
And I'm thinking, oh, so why are you busier now than you've ever been? And my conclusion is that they are saying yes to things that they wanted to say yes to before, but business life and their work life did not provide the opportunity for that. So they're doing things, and the real question that needs to be asked of them: so what is the difference that makes? And sometimes they can say yes, and other times they can say no. And the other thing is, I see often that they are also deciding that they're going to focus upon their grandchildren, and they're going to, in many cases, they move closer to their grandchildren, and
Mm.
and now they become surrogate backup parents to the parents of the child or the children. And so there is an aspect of eldership there, but they're not looking at this beyond the structure of the family.
Right. So what do you think we can do to help recover a mental model that other cultures had and still have in other places that I've worked in the world? They still have the concept of eldership as part of their mental model of aging, and we largely don't. So what is it that we can be doing to help people to to get that mental model of eldership restored into a Western culture?
Well, I would guess that we need to create opportunities for people, and we invite them to join us in these opportunities.
Right.
And I think it can begin with conversation. Like I'm talking with some young guys here in town. One of them has just opened up a co-working space, and a lot of the money for that space comes from a state program that supports new businesses.
Mm.
We're talking about creating um, a group that meets every month, and we're going to come together and we'll have coffee and we'll talk, and the idea will be we'll invite people to come join us. Um, for me, I don't meet a lot of people that are older than me, who are in a position where I know some, but they're not really in a position to give themselves to something like that. They're not they're not at a point in their life where they can take on something which has so much change and so much um, exposure to new things,
Mm.
locked into what they're doing. Um, and I'm not being critical in saying that, because I think they're doing things that are of value, but it's just they're not going to start new things. So I think it's a challenge. I think it's a challenge. And so I'm constantly looking for people who uh, will maybe be interested in doing something. And I'm tickling that idea all the time with people. And, you know, and I've learned that if I do it all, then it never really, there's nothing that's sustainable about it. So it's how to communicate, how to build a relationship where there's a sense of need on the individual's part that I need to be someone different than I have been. And in a world that's in the midst of such accelerating change and conflict, it's, people tend to go the other direction. I'm going to
Yeah.
go climb back into my cocoon, and I'm going to stay
Yeah,
there.
exactly. So what is going to create? I'm just trying to dig into this a little bit deeper. What is going to create that kind of sense of disruption, questioning, that's saying, I want to be different? What's going to create that in someone?
I think they have. I think they have to be asking questions first.
Right.
I think we have to be available to them. I'm finding that the vast majority of the people who are signing up for my Substack are not millennials and Gen Zers. They're older. They're
Right.
they're Gen Xers. They're Boomers. They're older. So and they're people overseas. So it's
Interesting.
yeah. Oh yeah. It's and that's to me that's kind of a measure, a thermostat. Not It's not a thermostat, a thermometer of what is taking place.
Mhm.
Uh, it's
So you said they need to start asking themselves questions. If I was to say to you, what are the questions you would encourage them to start asking themselves? What questions do you think you'd come up with?
I would ask them, what is it that you want to accomplish? What is it that you want to do? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that you want to accomplish? And what is it that I actually have 5 questions that I ask. So let me just,
Okay.
I call these the 5 questions that everyone must ask. The first question is, what has changed? And how am I in transition? So I want people to look back in time, 6 months, 18 months, 10 years, whatever it is, they decide that, and try to understand what is the pattern of change that's been going on in their life, and what is it. Let's say they're in the last 5 years of their career, and so I would ask them. So looking back over the last 5 years, so we're going to talk about 10 years, 10 years span. What in the last 5 years have you done, which has really been interesting to you, and is it something that you would like to carry on after you retire? I mean, that's a question I would ask. Second question is, as you look back over your life, what is the impact that you've had? Where have you had the greatest effect upon people or upon the world? What difference have you made? And oftentimes they have not thought about that, but they welcome that thought. The third thing I would ask them is, who is it that has been the beneficiary of your actions of impact? Who have you touched? What is it about them that they were the person that they were moved by what you said, or they were the person who was the beneficiary of something that you did? Who were they? Fourth question is, so with that understanding, what opportunities do I have now? And the fifth question is, what problems have I created, and what obstacles do I face? So that's a little package of questions that allow a person to go through into us from a self-awareness into a plan for something they can go do.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. And do you think the word eldership, when let's say you've engaged with someone with those questions, and do you think the word eldership helps or hinders? Is it a word you would add into the mix or keep away from the mix?
I think I would add it, like, because I think what you and I are talking about as eldership is really a form of mentorship. We're building relationships where we're going to have influence and impact upon people. And so I would describe that first and say, for people who are in our age range, what we're really are talking about is eldership, and how we, and in writing down some notes on your questions that you sent to me, the first thing I wrote down was our understanding that we are sages for the time that we're living in. We have seen things, we've experienced things, and maybe we have come to understand things, and we offer that sage wisdom to people, even people who are our age, who may have not had the benefits of the things that you and I have had, where we were taught and learned how to process things. We learned how to discern things, ask questions. And so we help them to and in that case, that relationship, I would say, I would go seeking for what is the wisdom that this person has that they can communicate to the world.
No, very good. It's shifted back to young people. How can we help young people to aspire to becoming elders? So let me just put a bit of background around that. So cultures that I've worked in where elders are part of the mental model, the fabric of growing, a young person from a young age is conscious of eldership. So they are mentored by elders. They're taken through rites of passage by elders. Mandela had elders formatively in his life from cradle to grave, literally. So that his model was always going to be, that's where I'm headed. How can we help young people to begin to aspire to become elders? And part of what I'm thinking about here is, how do we break the model? We can break the model by trying to address people our age, but we could also break the model by trying to get a whole new generation of people aspiring to become elders as they move and age.
This is what I've done in the past, so I'm right with you. I had an opportunity to speak to a high school group in Vienna, Austria, five years ago, and it was just one of these. I was at a conference, and these two high school students came up to me and the guy I was having lunch with, and they just started talking, and I said, could I come to your high school and speak? I'm going to be here all next week. And so they thought, hey, that sounds like a great idea. So they called their teacher, who was somewhere else in the building, and she called the headmaster at the school. And that was a Friday afternoon. On Monday morning, I was at the school, and I did a presentation, and I talked to these students about this, about thinking about their life, the full extent of their life being a life of impact. And I broke it down in terms of, well, you could do an impact a day for the rest of your life, and that would be significant. But what if you were to create organizations where you're having an impact every second of every day for the rest of your life? Think of the millions of moments of impact that will come from your own initiative. So it's helping people to think that their whole life can be lived as a person of impact, and that when they get to some point after their career is over, they have really the second career of being, in our language, being an elder. And going to go. I said, I want you to think about this. Think about asking yourself on your 100th birthday. What was it? Was 83 years from now. 83 years from now, on your 100th birthday, this is what I want you to be thinking about. Who have I made a difference in their life, and what has changed? And I said, if you all, there's about 125 in the room that day. I said, if each one of you decides to do this, and you together do this for the rest of your lives, you will change this world merely by the fact that you were here today, and some guy that you don't know suggested an idea that you took, and then you ran with it for the rest of your life. And that's the potential that resides in what you and I are talking about. It's how to think about that transition from where I'm bounded by career and work to I'm unbounded to be a person of impact, to be an elder, to have a difference, all the way through to the very end.
So it's interesting, because one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is we need to live with a higher order of question in our life. Mm-hmm. So, and by that, I'm kind of drawing a line in the sky here. Is, one line is the career line. I go to college or wherever I train, I get a job, and I follow that through. And if you follow that through it then stops because you can't do that job anymore, and that's then called retirement.
Right.
And it strikes me that the eldership question are the people who have been asking a higher order question, which is why am I here? What does contribution look like? So what you described there, your Austrian experience, is you were able to help a bunch of young people begin to ask the higher order question.
And that's what the students in Switzerland were also asking. They're asking that higher order question. And maybe that's the secret, is how do we help people who are young begin to ask those questions? And at some point they're going to realize that they're going to be an elder at some point, and
they're going to be older.
They're going to be older, and that therefore they can become
they can become
this role of elder in the world.
Yeah. So why do you think that many people get older, but not all of them get elder? What's your take?
I think they tend to be followers, and they're getting their signals from people and groups and sources of information that do not have their best interest in mind, and so they become sort of emotionally isolated from what is possible.
Okay. And
And
what creates that? You know, they're growing up in this world, they're going to work, families around, and what, how does that happen that that people can just remain like that?
I wish I really knew. I mean, I have my guesses. I think I think there's a lot of insecurity. I think it has something to do with how they were parented as a child. I think, you know, if the parent is domineering and doesn't allow the child to grow on his own or her own, I think that's part of it. I mean, I recognize with my children, I have three that are all in their 30s now. Early on, I think my oldest, when I realized this, my oldest was 12 and my youngest was 6. And I realized, you know, I need to start treating my children as adults. And so they would ask a question, and I would return the question to them and say, let's talk about this. You know, what do you think? What about that? What, you know, and that in teaching them to think for themselves,
Yeah.
become independent, not isolated, but independent, so they can function well. And that's exactly where they've
Yeah.
come. So I think there are a lot of people who never learned to be independent, and they are, as one of my sisters was talking about, being a rule follower. They're rule followers, and so whatever the rules are, they're going to follow those rules. I think it's a personality, it's a temperament, maybe it's a personality trait. I don't know. I haven't really looked into that because
Right.
um, I'm not sure that it helps actually change people who are stuck in kind of a conformist mindset.
Yeah.
And
So,
it's interesting because I don't think that's a liberal or a conservative thing. I think it's something other than that. It's not ideological. It's something
no.
emotional,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
so
No, that's very helpful. So, any closing thoughts at all around the issue of eldership, aspiring to it, growing as one, offering it, anything at all that we've
well
not covered?
well yeah, oh yeah, I have lots to say, and I think it all begins with relationship. When I started my podcast uh, network, my network at the Eddie Network podcast 2 months ago,
Hmm.
you know, I decided it was going to be an experiment in network building.
Yes.
So I'm asking people, who do you know that you think I should know? And you think that because they would be a good person to interview. And would you introduce me? So I'm building this thing around the idea of being introduced to people. And
Yeah.
when someone introduces me to someone that they believe is a friend, or someone they believe maybe I can help, or maybe they can help me, then that networking, that relationship building, I think is where a lot of this really can take place. And
Right.
I mean, I was introduced through LinkedIn to a guy last year, about a year ago, and I won't go into the whole story, but I ended up, um, you know, 2 months later at his home, having spent a day with him and meeting his wife and his 2 kids, and the relationship that was born there is, I would call it a mutual relationship. We're more collaborators than anything, and I found myself back there 3 months later, and spending 4.5 days with the whole family, and so I was the grandpa to the little girls, and that was the way they treated me. So obviously they have grandparents that they also treat that way, and so I think it's just putting ourselves in a position where we can start a relationship with someone and then allow that relationship to extend through their network in some way that where we can make a
That's
difference.
very good. Great. Well, thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
just
Thank
giving
you.
some time to just explore this.
So where do you take this idea of eldership forward? What are you planning to do with this?
So I'm doing a number of things. So I mean, I've obviously written 2 books, To Plant a Walnut Tree and Becoming Mandela. Becoming Mandela has a whole podcast series with it. So that's out there. I am just beginning the process of working towards a 3rd book on eldership, which is going to be much more like how do we make this work, called Recovering Eldership. So that process is beginning. I've got the Youth Compass project out there, which is free for any young person in the world to go online and do that. And that's a way of helping them invest in who they are becoming towards eldership. So I've got all those things out there. I have another book coming out in a few days' time.
Great.
Great. It's called We Don't Do God. I'm trying to address the issue when people who don't want to do formalized religion, but how do they make a space to make a spiritual journey when the whole culture is kind of saying, but we don't do God. So anyway, that comes out in a few days' time. I got a group of people together at my house for a weekend who just got together under the base of let's just talk about eldership. That was very good. So that was a starting place. And then on the 27th of April, I'm working with a leadership specialist called Giles Hutchins, who really works on how to help organizations reconnect with natural systems. Nature has a really good way of organizing itself. So why don't organizations organize themselves like that? Anyway, so he does that, and he owns 60 acres of wood down in the south of England. We're taking a bunch of leaders into the woods for a day just to look at the issue of eldership and how does being in nature help us reconnect with recovering eldership. So there's some of the things that I'm on right now.
Would please send me all the
I'll send you the links
so I can put it in the show notes for the podcast.
I'd be delighted.
I really want people to find you.
Thank you.
Because you're mentoring me in this.
Well, I think it's mutual.
Well, I think it's mutual too, but this is a bigger project for you than it has been for me. It's just something more natural to me, but I'm really interested in what you're doing and the
influence.
And
thank you.
Somehow we have to figure out how to connect my community in Africa and your community in Africa together.
Yes, together for sure.
We'll have to figure that out, and we'll do that at some point.
We will. Great. I really appreciate your time today, Ed. Thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate you very much, Trevor, and I'm glad to know you, and I look forward to
we'll talk again
with you in the future. And thank you, everyone, for watching. And make sure that for both of us that you subscribe, you link, and you like, and you comment, because commenting is a way for us to share what we think and connect with one another. And we build relationships through the comments when they're positive and constructive. So thank you for being here, and we'll see you soon.